The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor as Victoria Chen watched in horror. What should have been the celebration of her life's greatest achievement had turned into a nightmare in the span of 3 heartbeats. Richard Blackstone, the tech mogul worth $800 million, lay crumpled beside the conference table, his face ashen and his breathing shallow. The other executives in the room froze like deer caught in headlights, their expensive suits and polished shoes suddenly meaningless in the face of a human being fighting for his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The emergency had struck without warning during what was supposed to be the signing ceremony for the largest merger in Silicon Valley history. Blackstone Technologies was acquiring Victoria's startup, Neural Dynamics, for a staggering $400 million. The deal had taken 18 months to negotiate, involving teams of lawyers, accountants, and consultants who had scrutinized every aspect of both companies with microscopic precision. Victoria had worked 16-hour days for the past 5 years to build Neural Dynamics from a garage operation into a company that caught the attention of someone like Richard Blackstone. Her revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithms promised to transform how medical diagnoses were made, potentially saving millions of lives through early detection of diseases that currently went unnoticed until too late. The technology was her life's work, born from her own family's struggles with undiagnosed conditions that had claimed her younger brother when traditional medicine had failed him. Now, as she watched the paramedics work over Blackstone's unconscious form, Victoria felt her dreams slipping away like sand through her fingers. The other executives from Blackstone Technologies stood around looking helpless and panicked. James Morrison, the company's chief operating officer, kept checking his phone as if somehow the internet could provide guidance for this unprecedented situation. Sarah Williams, the head of legal affairs, had gone pale as she clutched the unsigned merger documents that represented hundreds of millions of dollars in limbo. The conference room at the Meridian Hotel had been chosen specifically for its prestige and privacy. Located on the 42nd floor of downtown San Francisco's newest skyscraper, it offered panoramic views of the bay and the kind of atmosphere that befitted a deal of this magnitude. The Brazilian mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably, and the walls were lined with abstract art worth more than most people's houses. Everything had been perfect until Richard Blackstone had suddenly grabbed his chest, gasped something about not being able to breathe, and collapsed onto the Persian rug that probably cost more than a luxury car. Maria Santos had been refilling the water glasses when it happened. As part of the hotel's elite catering staff, she had served at hundreds of high-level business meetings over the past decade. She was practically invisible to the executives who conducted their million-dollar deals while she quietly ensured their comfort. Her black uniform and white apron marked her as part of the service industry, someone whose presence was necessary but unremarkable. The wealthy men and women who filled these rooms rarely made eye contact with her, let alone engaged in conversation beyond polite requests for more coffee or additional napkins. But Maria had been watching more carefully than anyone realized. She had noticed the subtle signs that the others had missed in their excitement over the impending deal. Richard Blackstone's complexion had been slightly off when he arrived, though he had covered it well with his usual commanding presence. His breathing had been just a fraction more labored than normal during his opening remarks about the merger representing the future of medical technology. Most telling of all, she had seen him discreetly pop what appeared to be a small white pill when he thought nobody was looking, washing it down with a sip of sparkling water while the lawyers droned on about contractual provisions. The paramedics were efficient and professional, but Maria could see the concern in their eyes as they worked. Richard's pulse was erratic, and his blood pressure readings were causing them to exchange worried glances. They had administered oxygen and were preparing to transport him to the hospital, but the prognosis was clearly uncertain. One of them was already radiating ahead to ensure that a cardiac team would be standing by in the emergency room. Victoria felt helpless as she watched the man who held her company's future being wheeled toward the elevator on a stretcher. The merger agreement lay on the table like a ghost of what might have been, its pages filled with legal language that now seemed utterly meaningless. Without Richard's signature, the deal was effectively dead in the water. His company's board of directors would never approve such a massive acquisition without his direct involvement and blessing, especially with his health now thrown into serious question. James Morrison was already on his phone with the Blackstone Technologies board, explaining the situation in hushed tones while pacing near the windows. Sarah Williams was gathering the documents with mechanical precision, her legal training kicking in even as her face showed her shock at the sudden turn of events. The other executives were beginning to file out of the room, their expressions mixing genuine concern for Richard with obvious worry about what this meant for their own positions and the company's future. That was when Maria made a decision that would change everything. Instead of quietly continuing with her duties as the room emptied, she approached Victoria with a purposefulness that caught the young entrepreneur off guard. Victoria had been staring out at the San Francisco skyline, trying to process the fact that 5 years of her life's work might have just evaporated in a matter of minutes. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the catering worker standing beside her. "Excuse me, Miss Chen," Maria said softly, her slight accent adding warmth to her voice. "I know this isn't my place, but I think you should know something about Mr. Blackstone's condition." Victoria turned, surprised not only that the woman knew her name but that she was speaking at all. In all the high-level meetings Victoria had attended over the years, the service staff had remained virtually silent except for the most basic interactions. There was something in Maria's eyes, though, that commanded attention. It was an intelligence and depth that seemed at odds with her role in the room. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Victoria asked, her voice still shaky from the shock of watching Richard collapse. Maria glanced around the room, noting that most of the executives had left and the remaining few were engrossed in their phone calls and document gathering. She stepped closer to Victoria, lowering her voice to ensure their conversation remained private. "I've been working these corporate events for 10 years, Maria explained. You learn to notice things, to read people. Mr. Blackstone wasn't just having a heart attack. The symptoms, the timing, the way his body reacted. I've seen this before." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about? Seen what before?" Maria hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing whether to continue. "I think he's been poisoned." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Poisoned? That's impossible. We were all eating and drinking the same things. If someone had poisoned the food or drinks, we'd all be sick." "Not the food," Maria said quietly. "Something more targeted. Something that would only affect him specifically." Victoria stared at the woman, her mind racing. "Who are you? I mean, beyond working for the catering company. How would you know anything about poisoning?" Maria's expression grew distant for a moment, as if she were looking back through years of memories she had tried to forget. "Before I came to this country, I was a forensic scientist in Guatemala. I specialized in toxicology, identifying poisons and their effects on the human body. I worked on cases involving political assassinations, corporate espionage, and organized crime. I've seen every type of poisoning you can imagine, and I know the signs." Victoria felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet. This woman, who had been invisible to everyone in the room, who had been treated as nothing more than part of the furniture, was actually a highly trained scientist, with expertise directly relevant to what had just happened. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Victoria asked. "If you suspected something was wrong, why wait until after he collapsed?" "Because nobody would have listened to me," Maria replied with a bitter smile. "Look at me. Look at where I am and what I'm doing. In this world, I'm nobody. A cleaning lady, a server, someone whose opinion doesn't matter. But now that he's fighting for his life, maybe the truth has a chance." Victoria looked around the room with new eyes, suddenly seeing it not as the site of a collapsed business deal, but as a potential crime scene. If you're right, then someone in this room is responsible. Someone who wanted to stop this merger from happening. Or someone who wanted to stop Mr. Blackstone from something else entirely, Maria added. Corporate poisonings are rarely about just one deal. They're usually part of something much bigger. The implications began to cascade through Victoria's mind. If Richard had been deliberately poisoned, it meant that someone had planned this attack well in advance. It meant that the merger had been sabotaged by someone with both the means and the motive to eliminate Richard from the equation. Most chilling of all, it meant that whoever was responsible was likely still in the building, possibly still in the room with them. James Morrison finished his phone call and approached Victoria, his expression grave. "The board is calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Obviously, the merger is on hold indefinitely until we know more about Richard's condition and prognosis. I'm sorry, Victoria. I know how much this deal meant to you. Victoria nodded numbly, but her mind was now focused on something entirely different from the failed merger. James, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you notice anything unusual about Richard today? Anything at all that seemed off? James frowned, clearly puzzled by the question. Unusual how? I mean, he seemed his normal self. Confident, focused on the deal. Why do you ask? Did he take any medication while we were here? Pills? Anything like that? I don't think so. Well, maybe some antacids or something. He mentioned his stomach being a bit upset this morning, but that's not unusual given the stress of a deal this size. James paused, studying Victoria's face. Why are you asking these questions? What's going on? Victoria glanced at Maria, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I think we need to call the police. The police? James looked genuinely shocked. Victoria, I understand you're upset about the deal, but calling the police because Richard had a heart attack seems... It wasn't a heart attack, Victoria interrupted. At least, not a natural one. Sarah Williams, who had been gathering documents nearby, looked up sharply at Victoria's words. What exactly are you suggesting? Victoria felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Once she voiced her suspicions, there would be no taking them back. The merger would be the least of anyone's concerns, and the fallout could destroy not just the deal, but potentially multiple careers and reputations. I'm suggesting that someone poisoned Richard Blackstone, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt inside. And I think whoever did it is probably still in this building. The silence that followed was deafening. James and Sarah exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with growing alarm. Sarah was the first to find her voice. That's a very serious accusation, Victoria. Do you have any evidence to support it? Victoria looked at Maria again, realizing that she was about to stake everything on the word of a woman she had never spoken to before today, whose credentials she couldn't verify, and whose very presence in the room had been all but invisible to everyone else. She does, Victoria said, indicating Maria. Tell them what you told me. Maria straightened slightly, her professional demeanor asserting itself despite the incongruity of her uniform and surroundings. My name is Dr. Maria Santos. I have a doctorate in forensic science from Universidad del Valle in Guatemala, with a specialization in toxicology. I worked for 12 years with the Guatemalan National Police investigating suspicious deaths and poisoning cases. James stared at her with undisguised amazement. You're a doctor? But you're working for the catering company. Immigration is complicated, Maria replied simply. My credentials weren't recognized here, and I have a family to support, but my knowledge and experience remain valid regardless of what uniform I'm wearing. Sarah had pulled out her phone and was already typing. I'm looking up your background right now. Universidad del Valle Forensic Science Program. She paused, reading from her screen. They do have an excellent reputation in Latin America for forensic training. Their toxicology program is considered among the best in the region. Maria continued her explanation with the confidence of someone who had testified in courtrooms before. Mr. Blackstone showed classic signs of cardiotoxic poisoning. The timeline of his symptoms, the way his collapse occurred, the specific nature of his distress, it's consistent with certain plant-based alkaloids that can cause cardiac arrest while mimicking natural heart problems. Plant-based alkaloids? James asked, clearly out of his depth. Substances derived from plants that affect the heart's electrical system. They're particularly insidious because they're difficult to detect in routine blood tests, and the symptoms closely mimic natural cardiac events. In Guatemala, we saw them used in several high-profile assassination cases. Victoria felt a chill as the full implications sank in. So someone could have poisoned Richard in a way that would look like natural causes? Exactly. And if I'm right, the person who did it is counting on the fact that nobody would suspect poisoning. The hospital will treat it as a heart attack. Richard might survive or might not, and the poisoner walks away clean. Sarah was still researching on her phone. Dr. Santos, I'm finding references to several published papers you co-authored on forensic toxicology. Your credentials appear to be legitimate. Thank you for verifying that, Maria replied with dignity. Now, if we're going to prevent whoever did this from getting away with it, We need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." James ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process everything. "This is insane. You're talking about attempted murder at a business meeting. Things like that don't happen in the real world." "They happen more often than you think," Maria said quietly. "Corporate poisonings are actually not uncommon in cases involving large sums of money or significant business rivalries. The methods have become more sophisticated, but the motives remain the same." Victoria's mind was racing through the possibilities. If someone wanted to stop this merger, killing Richard would certainly accomplish that. Or, if someone at Blackstone Technologies wanted to prevent the acquisition for their own reasons, eliminating Richard would give them control of the company's direction. Or, Maria added, this might not be about the merger at all. Richard Blackstone has been involved in numerous high-stakes business dealings. This could be related to something entirely separate that we know nothing about. Sarah had been quiet for several minutes, apparently deep in thought. "If we're going to call the police, we need to do it now. But Victoria, you need to understand what this means. Once we make this accusation, there's no going back. The investigation will tear apart both companies. Everyone's background will be scrutinized, and the media attention will be intense." "The alternative is letting someone get away with attempted murder," Victoria replied, "and potentially allowing them to try again." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. James was pacing near the windows, clearly agitated. This is going to destroy the merger. Even if Richard recovers, the investigation and publicity will make the deal impossible. "The merger is already destroyed," Victoria pointed out. "Richard is in the hospital, fighting for his life. The question is whether we're going to let whoever did this walk away free to try again." Maria had been listening to this exchange with growing urgency. "We're wasting time. If Mr. Blackstone was poisoned, the hospital needs to know immediately so they can treat him properly. Every minute we delay could be the difference between his life and death." The gravity of her words settled over the room like a shroud. Victoria realized that this was no longer about business deals or mergers or money. This was about a human being whose life hung in the balance, and about justice for what might be one of the most audacious crimes in corporate history. "You're right," Victoria said finally. "Sarah, call the police. Tell them we have reason to believe Richard Blackstone was poisoned and that they need to coordinate with the hospital immediately." Sarah nodded and began dialing. James continued pacing but had stopped arguing. Maria stood quietly beside the conference table, her transformation from invisible service worker to key witness complete. As Sarah spoke with the police dispatcher, Victoria found herself looking at Maria with newfound respect and curiosity. "Why did you risk telling us this? You could have just continued with your job, and nobody would have been the wiser." Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "In Guatemala, I worked on a case involving a businessman who was poisoned during a contract signing. The symptoms were identical to what I saw today with Mr. Blackstone. In that case, nobody listened to the evidence because they assumed it was a natural death. The killer went free and struck again 6 months later, killing a judge who was about to rule against his interests." She paused, her eyes distant with the memory. "I came to this country to escape violence and corruption, to build a better life for my daughter. But I've learned that evil exists everywhere, and sometimes the only difference between justice and injustice is whether someone with knowledge is willing to speak up, regardless of their station in life." Victoria felt a profound respect for this woman who had risked everything to do what was right. "What happened to your career? How did you end up working for a catering company?" "The immigration process is complex," Maria explained. "My degree needed to be validated, which required years of additional study and certification exams. Meanwhile, I had to support my family. The catering work pays well and fits around my schedule while I complete the requirements to practice forensic science again." "How close are you to getting your credentials recognized?" "I take the final certification exam next month. If I pass, I'll be eligible to work with law enforcement again." Maria smiled slightly, though after today, that timeline might accelerate dramatically. Sarah finished her call with the police. "They're sending detectives immediately, and they're coordinating with the hospital to have Richard's blood tested for toxins. They want everyone who was in this room to remain available for questioning." "What about the other executives who left?" Victoria asked. "They're tracking them down now. Everyone who was present during the meeting will be considered a potential witness or suspect until they can determine what happened." James had stopped pacing and was staring out at the city skyline. "I can't believe this is really happening. Richard's been like a mentor to me for the past 8 years. The thought that someone deliberately tried to kill him." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "The police will figure out who did it," Victoria said, with more confidence than she felt, especially with Dr. Santos's expertise to guide the investigation. Maria shook her head. "I can provide some initial guidance, but I'm not officially credentialed to work on cases in this jurisdiction. The police will need to bring in their own toxicologists." "But you'll cooperate with the investigation?" "Of course, and I'll make sure they understand exactly what signs to look for and what tests to run. The person who did this chose their poison carefully, but no crime is perfect. There will be evidence if they know where to look." The sound of elevator doors opening in the hallway announced the arrival of the police. Victoria felt her heart rate increase as she realized that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of Richard Blackstone but potentially the course of multiple lives and careers. Detective Ray Martinez was the first to enter the conference room, followed by his partner Detective Lisa Park and a crime scene photographer. Martinez was a veteran investigator in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades dealing with human nature at its worst. Park was younger, probably in her 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room simultaneously. "I'm Detective Martinez. This is Detective Park," Martinez announced to the room. "We understand there may have been a suspicious illness here today involving Mr. Richard Blackstone." Sarah stepped forward in her role as legal counsel. "I'm Sarah Williams, representing Blackstone Technologies. We called you because we have reason to believe Mr. Blackstone may have been poisoned during our meeting." Martinez nodded and pulled out a notebook. "We'll need to speak with each of you individually, but first, can someone give me a basic timeline of what happened here today?" Victoria found herself becoming the spokesperson for the group. "We were here for a merger signing between Blackstone Technologies and my company Neural Dynamics. The meeting started at 2 o'clock. Richard seemed fine initially, but around 3:15, he suddenly grabbed his chest and collapsed." "Was he exhibiting any symptoms before he collapsed?" Maria stepped forward. "Detective, my name is Dr. Maria Santos. I'm a forensic scientist with expertise in toxicology, and I observed Mr. Blackstone throughout the meeting. He showed subtle signs consistent with cardiotoxic poisoning." Martinez looked surprised. "You're a forensic scientist? But you're dressed like catering staff." "It's complicated," Maria replied. "But my observation is that Mr. Blackstone was exhibiting classic symptoms of alkaloid poisoning designed to mimic natural cardiac arrest." Park had been photographing the room and taking notes. "Dr. Santos, can you be more specific about what you observed?" Maria launched into a detailed description of Richard's symptoms, the timeline of their progression, and her assessment of the likely cause. The detectives listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Victoria was impressed by Maria's professionalism and the clear, methodical way she presented her observations. "Have you coordinated with the hospital about testing?" Victoria asked. "Yes, they're running a full toxicology panel now," Martinez replied. "Dr. Santos, would you be willing to consult with our forensics team about what specific substances to test for?" "Absolutely. I can provide them with a list of cardiotoxic alkaloids that would produce these symptoms and suggest the most effective testing protocols." As the initial interviews continued, Victoria found herself studying the faces of everyone in the room. If Maria was right about the poisoning, then someone present was a potential killer. James looked genuinely shaken and confused, his concern for Richard appearing authentic. Sarah was operating in full legal mode, precise and professional, but clearly rattled by the situation. The remaining catering staff members seemed bewildered by the sudden transformation of their routine workday into a criminal investigation. Detective Park approached Victoria. "Miss Chen, I understand this merger was worth several $100 million. Can you think of anyone who might have wanted to prevent it from happening?" Victoria considered the question carefully. There are always competitors who might prefer that major acquisitions not take place. And there could be people within either company who opposed the merger for various reasons, but I can't think of anyone who would resort to attempted murder. What about personal enemies of Mr. Blackstone? Anyone who might have a grudge against him specifically? I don't know him well enough personally to answer that. James Morrison might have better insight into Richard's personal relationships and potential conflicts. As the questioning continued, Victoria noticed Maria quietly observing the proceedings with the sharp attention of someone trained to notice details others might miss. She wondered what the forensic scientist was seeing that the rest of them were blind to. The investigation was just beginning, but Victoria already understood that nothing would ever be the same. The merger that had represented her life's greatest achievement was now secondary to questions of life, death, and justice. And at the center of it all was a woman who had been invisible to everyone in the room until the moment she chose to step forward and reveal her hidden expertise. The truth about what had happened in this conference room was still emerging, but one thing was already clear. Sometimes the most important witness is the one nobody thinks to notice. 3 weeks later, Dr. Maria Santos walked through the gleaming corridors of the San Francisco Police Department's forensics laboratory, wearing a crisp white lab coat instead of her black catering uniform. The transformation felt surreal, as if she had stepped through a portal between two different worlds. The familiar scent of chemical reagents and the hum of analytical equipment brought back memories of her former life in Guatemala, when she had been Dr. Santos every day instead of just Maria, the invisible catering worker. The investigation into Richard Blackstone's poisoning had moved with unprecedented speed once the toxicology results confirmed Maria's suspicions. The hospital had found traces of oleander extract in his bloodstream, a deadly plant-based toxin that attacked the heart's electrical system exactly as Maria had predicted. Richard had survived, but barely, spending 8 days in intensive care while his body fought off the effects of what doctors confirmed would have been a fatal dose for most people his age. Detective Martinez had fast-tracked Maria's consultation with the police forensics team, and her expertise had proven invaluable in directing the investigation. Within 48 hours of the incident, she had been offered a temporary position as a forensic consultant, while the permanent hiring process moved through the bureaucratic channels. The irony wasn't lost on her that a crime had opened the door to the career she had been struggling to rebuild for nearly a decade. Victoria Chen sat in the witness room adjacent to the main laboratory, reviewing her statement one final time before the preliminary hearing. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and corporate upheaval that made her previous worries about merger negotiations seem quaint by comparison. Neural Dynamics had been thrust into the spotlight not for its revolutionary technology, but as part of one of the most sensational attempted murder cases in Silicon Valley history. The investigation had revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond the conference room where Richard had collapsed. The person responsible wasn't someone trying to stop the merger, as Victoria had initially suspected, but rather someone much closer to Richard, who had been planning his elimination for months. The motive wasn't business competition, but something far more personal and twisted. Angela Blackstone, Richard's ex-wife, had been arrested 5 days after the poisoning attempt. The divorce proceedings that had concluded 2 years earlier had left her bitter and financially diminished, despite a substantial settlement. What investigators discovered was that Angela had been systematically planning her former husband's death while maintaining a facade of cordial post-divorce relations. She had researched various untraceable poisons, studied Richard's business schedule to identify opportunities, and eventually settled on oleander extract as her weapon of choice. The method of delivery had been ingenious in its simplicity. Angela had befriended one of the catering staff at the Meridian Hotel months before the merger meeting, gradually building a relationship that allowed her to learn about upcoming high-profile events. On the day of the signing, she had arrived at the hotel as a guest of another function taking place on a lower floor. During a carefully timed bathroom break, she had slipped into the service areas and added the oleander extract to a specific water glass that she knew would be placed at Richard's seat. The plan had nearly worked perfectly. Without Maria's intervention and expertise, Richard's death would have been attributed to natural causes, and Angela would have inherited the remainder of his estate as specified in their original prenuptial agreement. The insurance policies and business holdings would have made her one of the wealthiest women in California, and the slow-acting nature of the poison would have provided her with an airtight alibi, since she wasn't even in the same room when Richard collapsed. Maria reviewed the chemical analysis reports one more time before the hearing. The oleander extract had been remarkably pure, indicating that Angela had either obtained it from a sophisticated supplier or had the knowledge to extract and concentrate it herself. Further investigation had revealed that Angela held a degree in biochemistry from Stanford, a detail that had been overlooked in the initial background checks because she had never pursued a career in the sciences after her marriage to Richard. The case had attracted national media attention, not just because of the wealth and prominence of the people involved, but because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the investigation. The story of a forensic scientist working as catering staff who had solved an attempted murder had captured the public imagination. Maria found herself uncomfortable with the celebrity aspect of the situation, preferring to focus on the scientific work that had always been her passion. Dr. James Patterson, the chief of the police forensics laboratory, knocked on the doorframe of Maria's temporary office. "The defense attorneys are trying to challenge your qualifications again," he informed her. "They're arguing that your foreign credentials and employment history make your testimony unreliable." Maria smiled grimly. "Let them try. I have 12 years of casework, published research, and the physical evidence speaks for itself. The oleander extract doesn't lie about its chemical signature. The prosecutor thinks Angela's team is getting desperate. The evidence is overwhelming, and they know it. Challenging your credentials is basically their last shot at creating reasonable doubt." "What's the latest update on Richard's condition?" "He's being discharged from the hospital tomorrow. Full recovery, though his doctors say another hour's delay in proper treatment could have been fatal. You literally saved his life by speaking up when you did." Maria felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Relief that Richard would survive, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a lingering sadness about the circumstances that had brought her expertise back into play. She had hoped to leave the world of criminal investigation behind when she immigrated to the United States, seeking a quieter life focused on building a better future for her daughter. Victoria appeared in the doorway, looking polished and professional, in a navy business suit that contrasted sharply with the last time Maria had seen her in the conference room 3 weeks ago. "Dr. Santos, I wanted to thank you again before the hearing begins. I know you've probably heard this 100 times, but what you did took incredible courage." "I did what any scientist would do when faced with evidence of a crime," Maria replied modestly. "The courage belonged to you for believing me and calling the police despite having no reason to trust my judgment. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something related to that." Victoria sat down across from Maria's desk. "The merger with Blackstone Technologies is moving forward after all. Richard insists on honoring the original agreement, and he's added some specific provisions that I think might interest you." Maria raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure how a business merger would involve me." Richard has established a new division within the combined company focused on forensic applications of artificial intelligence. He wants to develop technology that can assist in criminal investigations, particularly in areas like toxicology and pattern recognition. He specifically requested that you head up the scientific advisory board. The offer caught Maria completely off guard, but I'm just getting started with the police laboratory. I haven't even completed my credential validation process. That's the beauty of it. This position would allow you to work in forensic science, while also developing cutting-edge technology that could revolutionize criminal investigations. The salary would be triple what you'd make in a traditional forensic lab, and you'd be working with some of the most advanced AI systems in the world. Maria felt torn between excitement and caution. It sounds incredible, but I need to be sure this isn't some kind of guilt-driven gesture from Richard. I don't want charity disguised as opportunity. Victoria laughed. Trust me, Richard Blackstone doesn't do charity. He's a businessman first and foremost. He sees the potential for AI-assisted forensic analysis to become a massive new market, and he wants the best possible scientific leadership. Your expertise in toxicology, combined with your investigative experience, makes you uniquely qualified. What about my daughter? She's in her final year of high school, and I don't want to disrupt her education. The position is based here in San Francisco, no relocation required. Plus, the company has an excellent college scholarship program that could help with her university expenses. Maria considered the offer carefully. The opportunity to combine her scientific background with cutting-edge technology was appealing, but she had learned to be cautious about dramatic changes after the upheaval of immigration and starting over in a new country. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. Richard understands that this is a big decision. He's actually planning to make the offer formally, after Angela's trial concludes, assuming you're interested in hearing more details. Detective Martinez appeared at the office door, looking official in his court testimony suit. Ladies, it's time. The judge wants to start the preliminary hearing in 10 minutes. The courthouse was packed with reporters, legal observers, and curious onlookers drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Maria had testified in numerous trials during her career in Guatemala, but never with this level of media attention and public scrutiny. She felt nervous but prepared, knowing that her scientific analysis would be crucial to the prosecution's case. Angela Blackstone sat at the defense table looking every inch the wealthy socialite she had been during her marriage to Richard. Her expensive clothing and professional makeup couldn't hide the hardness in her eyes, though, or the calculating way she studied everyone in the courtroom. When her gaze fell on Maria, there was a flash of pure hatred that made it clear she understood exactly who was responsible for her current predicament. The prosecutor, District Attorney Victoria Chen, began her opening statement by outlining the methodical way Angela had planned and executed the poisoning attempt. The evidence was damning. Financial records showing Angela's deteriorating economic situation, internet searches for information about plant-based toxins, surveillance footage of her at the hotel on the day of the incident, and the chemical analysis proving the presence of oleander extract in Richard's system. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, D.A. Chen concluded, this was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a carefully orchestrated attempt at murder, planned months in advance by someone who stood to gain millions of dollars from her victim's death. The only reason Richard Blackstone is alive today is because of the quick thinking and expertise of Dr. Maria Santos, whose scientific training allowed her to recognize what everyone else missed. The defense attorney, Jonathan Mills, rose for his opening statement with the confidence of someone who had built a career defending wealthy clients in high-profile cases. My client, Angela Blackstone, is the victim here. Victim of a vindictive ex-husband who has used his wealth and influence to frame her for a crime she didn't commit. The prosecution's case relies entirely on the testimony of an unqualified witness whose foreign credentials have never been properly verified and whose employment as catering staff raises serious questions about her credibility and potential motives. Maria felt her jaw tighten at the personal attack, but she had expected this line of defense. The strategy was obvious: discredit her expertise and character in hopes of creating doubt about the scientific evidence. Mills continued his attack. Dr. Santos, if we can even call her that, has a clear financial incentive to fabricate her testimony. She's been offered lucrative consulting contracts and job opportunities as a direct result of her involvement in this case. How can we trust someone who stands to profit from her accusations? The implications stung, but Maria reminded herself that this was standard defense tactics. Her job was to present the scientific facts clearly and let the evidence speak for itself. When she was called to testify, Maria walked to the witness stand with calm confidence. D.A. Chen led her through her educational background, professional experience in Guatemala, and the circumstances that had brought her to work in catering while pursuing credential validation. The prosecutor was careful to establish Maria's qualifications thoroughly before moving to her observations on the day of the poisoning. Dr. Santos, can you describe what you observed about Mr. Blackstone's condition during the business meeting? Maria provided a detailed, methodical account of Richard's symptoms, the timeline of their progression, and her assessment of the likely cause. She explained the specific characteristics of oleander poisoning and why it was particularly suited to someone wanting to commit an undetectable murder. In your expert opinion, was Mr. Blackstone's collapse consistent with natural cardiac arrest? No, it was not. The symptom pattern, timing, and specific physiological responses were characteristic of cardiotoxic alkaloid poisoning, specifically oleander extract. How certain are you of this assessment? Based on my 12 years of experience investigating similar cases and the subsequent laboratory confirmation of oleander in Mr. Blackstone's bloodstream, I am completely certain that he was deliberately poisoned. The cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. Mills attempted to discredit Maria's qualifications, question her motives, and suggest that her observations were influenced by a desire for attention or financial gain. Maria answered each question calmly and factually, never allowing herself to become defensive or emotional despite the personal nature of the attacks. Dr. Santos, isn't it true that you were working as catering staff because your qualifications weren't recognized in this country? I was working in catering while completing the credential validation process required for foreign-trained professionals. This process typically takes several years and requires extensive additional education and examination. So you admit that your credentials weren't sufficient to practice forensic science in the United States. I admit that bureaucratic processes exist to ensure consistency in professional standards. My knowledge and experience remained valid regardless of the administrative requirements. But you were essentially unemployed in your supposed field of expertise. I was temporarily employed in a different field while pursuing validation of my credentials. Many immigrant professionals face similar challenges regardless of their qualifications. Mills continued his attack for nearly an hour, but Maria's answers remained consistent and professional. When he attempted to suggest that she had fabricated her observations to gain attention, Maria's response was particularly effective. "Mr. Mills, if I wanted attention or financial gain, there were many easier ways to achieve those goals than accusing someone of attempted murder in front of a room full of powerful people. The risks of being wrong far outweighed any potential benefits. I spoke up because a man's life was in danger, and I had the knowledge to help save him." The jury's body language suggested they found Maria credible and Mills' attacks unsympathetic. When the defense attorney finally concluded his cross-examination, D.A. Chen had only a few follow-up questions to reinforce key points. "Dr. Santos, do you have any financial or personal relationship with Mr. Blackstone that would influence your testimony?" "None whatsoever. I had never met him before the day of the incident, and I have no financial interest in the outcome of this case." "What would have happened if you had remained silent about your observations?" "Mr. Blackstone would almost certainly have died, and his death would have been attributed to natural causes. The person responsible would have gotten away with murder." The testimony of other witnesses further strengthened the prosecution's case. Hotel security footage showed Angela in areas where she shouldn't have been. Her financial records revealed mounting debts and expensive lifestyle she couldn't afford, and computer forensics had recovered deleted internet searches about various poisons and their detection methods. Richard Blackstone himself testified about his relationship with Angela, their contentious divorce, and his complete surprise at learning about the poisoning attempt. His testimony was powerful but restrained, focusing on facts rather than emotions, despite the obvious trauma of learning that someone he had once loved had tried to kill him. "I trusted Angela completely during our marriage," he stated. "Even after our divorce, I believed we had maintained a respectful relationship. To learn that she had been planning my death while smiling at me at social events is something I'm still trying to process." The defense case was weak, relying primarily on character witnesses who testified about Angela's generous nature and community involvement. They couldn't effectively counter the physical evidence or provide alternative explanations for her suspicious behavior on the day of the incident. Angela herself chose not to testify, a decision that surprised many observers but made sense given the strength of the evidence against her. Her attorneys were clearly hoping to avoid subjecting her to cross-examination that would likely have been devastating. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of attempted murder in the first degree. Angela showed no emotion as the verdict was read, maintaining the composed facade she had presented throughout the trial. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, with Angela facing a potential sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison. As the courtroom emptied, Maria felt a profound sense of closure mixed with sadness. Justice had been served, but the whole situation remained a tragedy of human nature and misplaced values. A brilliant woman had destroyed her life and nearly killed someone else because of greed and bitterness that had consumed her rational judgment. Victoria approached Maria outside the courthouse, where reporters were still gathering for final comments. "How does it feel to have your testimony result in a conviction?" "I feel satisfied that the truth came out and that Mr. Blackstone will get the justice he deserved. But there's no joy in seeing someone destroy their life the way Angela did. It's just sad all around." "Have you given any more thought to Richard's job offer?" Maria nodded. "I've decided to accept it, assuming the terms are as favorable as you described. This case has reminded me why I became a forensic scientist in the first place. If we can develop technology that helps solve crimes and save lives, that seems like a worthy use of my experience. I think you'll find working with our AI systems fascinating. The potential applications for forensic science are virtually limitless." 3 months after Angela's conviction and sentencing to 20 years in prison, Dr. Maria Santos stood in her new office on the 35th floor of the Blackstone Neural Dynamics building. The view overlooked San Francisco Bay, and the modern laboratory facilities were beyond anything she had dreamed of when she first arrived in the United States. Her official title was Director of Forensic AI Development, and her team included some of the most talented programmers and scientists in Silicon Valley. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways she hadn't experienced since her early career in Guatemala. They were developing artificial intelligence systems that could analyze crime scene data, identify patterns in criminal behavior, and assist with complex forensic investigations. The oleander poisoning case had become their first major test case, with the AI system successfully identifying the specific chemical signatures and behavioral patterns that had led to Angela's conviction. Maria's daughter Sophia had been accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship funded by the Blackstone Foundation. She planned to study biochemistry and forensic science, inspired by her mother's career and the dramatic events that had transformed their lives. The irony that she would be attending the same university where Angela Blackstone had learned the knowledge she used for attempted murder wasn't lost on either of them. Richard Blackstone had become not just an employer but something approaching a friend. The shared experience of the poisoning attempt had created a bond between them that transcended typical business relationships. He often stopped by Maria's laboratory to check on their progress and seemed genuinely interested in the technical aspects of their work rather than just the commercial potential. "Any word from the FBI about adopting our facial recognition enhancement system?" he asked during one of his visits. "They're running pilot tests in 3 field offices," Maria replied. "The early results are promising. We're able to identify suspects from partial images that would have been useless with conventional analysis. And the toxicology database? That's moving even faster. Police departments across the country are contributing case data, and we're building the most comprehensive poison identification system ever created. The next time someone tries what Angela did, investigators will have much better tools to catch them." Richard nodded approvingly. "It's satisfying to know that something positive came from such a negative experience. Angela's attempt on my life may end up saving dozens of other potential victims." "That's how I try to think about it," Maria agreed. "Every case we solve prevents future crimes. It's the same motivation that drove me in Guatemala, just with better tools and resources." Victoria Chen, who had become the chief technology officer of the merged company, joined their conversation. "Maria, I wanted to update you on the pharmaceutical industry interest in our work. 3 major companies want to license our drug interaction analysis system for their safety testing protocols. That's excellent news. The more applications we can find for the technology, the more lives we can potentially impact." The success of their forensic AI systems had exceeded everyone's expectations, attracting attention from law enforcement agencies, private security firms, and even international organizations dealing with complex criminal investigations. Maria found herself traveling frequently to conferences and training sessions, sharing her expertise with investigators around the world. The personal transformation was equally dramatic. Maria had gone from being invisible in corporate meetings to being recognized as one of the leading experts in forensic technology development. Magazine articles had been written about her journey from catering worker to criminal justice innovator, though she still felt uncomfortable with the public attention. More importantly, she had regained the sense of purpose and professional fulfillment that had been missing during her years of credential validation and temporary employment. The work was meaningful, challenging, and positioned to make a real difference in the world of criminal justice. One evening, as Maria was preparing to leave the office after a particularly productive day of system testing, she received a call from Detective Martinez. He had been promoted to head of the police department's new forensic technology division, a position created specifically to interface with the private sector innovations that companies like Blackstone Neural Dynamics were producing. "Maria, we just used your oleander detection protocol on a case in Oakland. Saved us about 3 weeks of investigation time and probably prevented a killer from striking again." "That's wonderful to hear. The system performed as expected?" "Better than expected. The AI identified the specific plant variety used and even suggested geographic regions where it might have been harvested. Led us directly to the suspect's property, where we found the source plants." "I'm glad the technology is proving useful in real investigations. That's exactly what we hoped to achieve." "There's something else. The FBI wants to discuss a consulting contract for a series of cases involving organized crime and sophisticated poisoning methods. International scope, very high profile. They specifically requested you personally. Maria felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. International cases meant complex travel schedules and potentially dangerous situations, but they also represented the kind of challenging work that had originally drawn her to forensic science. Can you send me the details? I'll need to discuss it with Richard and Victoria to make sure it fits with our development timeline. Will do. And Maria? Thank you for what you did that day in the conference room. That decision to speak up has ripple effects we're still discovering. After hanging up, Maria stood at her office window looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening darkness. The path from invisible catering worker to leading forensic scientist had been unexpected and sometimes overwhelming, but it had also been profoundly satisfying. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sophia at Stanford. Mom, got an A on my organic chemistry exam. Professor said my understanding of molecular structures is exceptional. Guess I inherited the right genes. Maria smiled, thinking about how different their lives had become since that dramatic day when she chose to step forward and share her knowledge despite the risks. Sometimes the most important decisions are made in moments when staying silent would be easier and safer, but speaking up serves a greater good. The forensic laboratory would continue its work tomorrow, developing new tools to fight crime and protect innocent people. Maria would continue building the career she had thought was lost forever, while helping to create technology that could save lives around the world. And somewhere in the justice system, the conviction of Angela Blackstone served as a reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes could be solved when expertise and courage intersected at the right moment. The transformation was complete, but Maria understood that it was also ongoing. Each new case, each technological breakthrough, and each life saved would add another layer to the journey that had begun when she decided that some truths were too important to remain hidden, regardless of her supposed place in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.